Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. Early on in my software career, 4 little letters almost got me fired. LGTM. And if you're not familiar with that phrase or that acronym, it stands for Looks Good to Me. I want to go over peer reviews, what are PRs, the story of how I almost got fired, what you can take away from that to hopefully avoid this embarrassing lesson, and a bit about the software development lifecycle. I talk a lot about code or about job trajectory, but this is one of those interesting pieces of being a software developer, which isn't talked about too much, the art of doing a peer review. And once you are a hired software developer, or maybe you already are a software developer, I think there's a lot we can learn about doing good PRs. PR stands for peer review. We're going to get into that, how it fits into the software development lifecycle, how to not suck at doing them, and how I went from one of the worst PR people, PRs, peer reviewers, whatever, to one of the best ones on my team. But before I get into that, you should know that today, if you're listening to this on the day it's released, is the day before the last day to get the big discount for admission to Parsity. We have a job guarantee. Of course, there's some stipulations on it. You know, nothing too crazy, honestly. Of course, there's some fine print, but we're not going to make you do 1,000 applications or anything like that. We're small. We're going to keep that way. That way we can give each student the individual attention they deserve. We have excellent curriculum, career services, and tons of other stuff that I can stand by and feel good about. Anyway, if you want to do it, you should. Go to parsity.io and check it out. Back to the art of the PR, a peer review. So at Parsity, we actually do this too. We mimic the same structure that you'll be using at a job when you want to submit some code. So here's how it goes. You write code and it works on your machine. You have a feature that comes in. Your boss, manager, whoever says, hey, we want to make a new button for our homepage. And they give you a ticket, which will tell you the instructions for what the button should do, what it might look like. Maybe a design is attached to it as well. And then it's up to you as a developer to take that bit of direction and then actually build the thing out. It's not going to tell you a step-by-step laundry list of how to do everything. Like, it should be exactly this color on this exact part of the page, and it should do exactly this and exactly that. A lot of these things you'll have to figure out on your own, or just use your common sense, which is reason number 4,269 why I'm less worried about AI than most people. Because even this small thing, this small trivial task of adding a button can already involve multiple parties. If you ask about bigger things like, hey, I want you to make a feature that, a new landing page feature, like a generic landing page template that's going to use this CMS system. It should have these features. And then thinking of how to write that and then decompose that into smaller tasks and write it out. It's a big old deal. Not something a robot can do right now, at least. And I don't think that's going to happen within our lifetime. I don't know, maybe at least within the next 5 years. Again, join Parsity now. Anyway, so the PR part of this life cycle, of this software development life cycle, is you've written the code, you think it looks good, and you're like, okay, here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to submit this. I'm going to open up a pull request on GitHub, PR, pull request, PR, peer review, pull request. I'm going to request that somebody look at this before it is merged into the code base that will eventually be deployed to a production site for the whole world to enjoy, or for our customers to enjoy. So before it gets output to the real world, it'll have this step or series of steps where a person, another human, not a robot, will be involved, looking at it, reading over it, and making sure it's okay. Because as a human, you're going to mess up, right? You're going to say, oh, I misspelled click here. It says clack here. Oops, silly me. Thank God that didn't just go out and embarrass the company, right? So the peer reviewer's job is really important. And they can either do what I call a thorough review, which we'll get into how to do a thorough review, or they can do what's called the rubber stamp, where they look at it and they say, oh, Sally, she's really smart. She's been here so much longer than I have. What could I possibly have to offer in a peer review here? So they just rubber stamp it. They say, hey, LGTM looks good to me. Ship it. And then people think, okay, cool. It's gone through the correct process. We're going to ship it out. And goes out, causes a bug. Now, guess what? This is where that software developer life cycle comes into play. You write out a feature, you write the code, you deploy the code, you test the code, a bug happens. Next, it goes back into that circle of life. So now you have to write more code, test the code, deploy the code, more bugs happen. which is exactly why your profession as a software developer is likely not going anywhere, because as many features as we write and as much code as we put out, inevitably bugs happen as a result. PRs are a good way to catch bugs. We can't always catch all of them, but you need to try to catch as many as you can by doing thorough PRs. So here's me at a new company about 5 years ago or so, maybe 6 years ago. I was a mid-level developer. I was trying to make a name for myself here. I've talked about it a few times. It was at a pretty fast-paced tech startup in the Bay Area, really, really strong engineers here. And I was tasked with doing a PR for a much more senior engineer on the team. And I looked at it. I went through the code only. So I just read over the code. Mistake number one, which we'll get into in a minute. I read over the code and I thought, okay, this looks pretty good, right? I don't see anything glaring. Like he didn't make any spelling mistakes. I was looking for really trivial stuff. I was just trying to get back to my work because I thought this is not as important as the work that I'm doing. I'm trying to write a feature. And now I have to spend 20, 30 minutes, an hour looking over this guy's work. I'm sure it's fine. He's a super senior developer. What could possibly go wrong? Stamped, boom, approved. Next day, I get a Slack message from the lead developer on the team. It says, "Hey, Brian, do you have a moment to chat?" And I'm thinking, oof, my anxiety level raised, right? When you get those cryptic Slack messages. By the way, if you're on Slack and you ever start a message with hello or hi and don't say anything else, just know that somebody's anxiety level is raising. Neurotic people like me hate those kind of cryptic Slack messages. I'm like, get to the point. Anyway, he's like, "Can we speak later on?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." We get on a call. He's like, "Hey, man, I noticed you did a PR for this feature yesterday." And I said, "Yeah, I did." And he says, "Well, there's a huge problem with that." I'm like, "Oh, no." He's like, "Yeah, that code is completely unacceptable and it has a ton of mistakes. And I'm just curious, how did you not catch any one of these 3 mistakes?" I literally didn't catch a spelling error. One of the developers, English is not his first language, and he misspelled a pretty easy word that I should have caught. The functionality literally did not work in the way it was intended to. And in general, the code wasn't very well organized. But these are 2 massive things that I just did not catch. And honestly, I was embarrassed, but I was also feeling a little bit like, well, I didn't write the code, right? Like, why is this on me? I didn't say that at the time because I just owned up to my mistake. I said, "You're right. I should have done better." He's like, "Yeah, here's the thing." He's like, "If you approve code and you're saying that it's okay, you've put your stamp on it. You're telling us that you've looked over it and that we can trust that it's good. And if we can't trust that you're looking at it to review it, then it makes us lose trust in you too." And I said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. This will not happen again." And I thought, I'm going to be the best damn code reviewer on this freaking team. And I made a resolution that day to do that. Most of the leaps that I've made in my software developer career thus far have come from embarrassing mistakes like this, which is kind of why I think they are very, very necessary for any career. If you're not making any mistakes, it probably tells me you're not moving fast enough or you're not trying to do things outside of your comfort zone. And if you're making a lot of mistakes and never learning from them, well, then I guess we've already said you're probably not learning from them and applying the lessons there. So getting this kind of harsh feedback was really, really helpful in many ways. And every single time I've gotten that kind of feedback that stings, it makes me feel small inside and feel like, oh man, I screwed up. Maybe I'm going to get fired. Maybe I'm going to be laughed out of the room. Maybe I finally exposed myself again. I also know now from the benefit of history that these are usually the moments that are the most pivotal, right? So you can take them and be embarrassed and you can get over it and say, you know what? I'm going to make sure I'm never this embarrassed again. And that's what I tend to do. And that's what I suggest you do as well when these things happen. You get over it, you say, look, that was old me. New me's not going to do that anymore. And if you do again, you say, okay, well, how did I mess up? Try to look at it objectively. Think, how can I avoid this from ever happening again? And so I did. I just copied and pasted what the lead developer was doing. And actually, this has been a strategy for my entire career, copying and pasting, not copying and pasting code from like Stack Overflow or Chat GPT. I mean, I do that within reason. That's a whole other show topic on its own. I copied and pasted from what I saw other developers do. At every company I went to, I looked at who's the big dog in the room, who's the smartest developer here, who's the most respected developer here, what are they doing, what am I not doing? I would literally write it out. I'm like, okay. And I did. I said, hey man, you do really good reviews because this guy, the lead developer, he was lead for a reason. Amazing. He's now at IBM, some high level up there. Just really, really good. By the way, he was a former musician, went to college and went to a boot camp lead developer. So get this thing out of your head that you can't be a super technical developer, the lead on a team of mostly computer science grads just because you didn't get a CS degree. He was amazing, former musician, which tracks because people that tend to do really well in this profession come from a few different job types, which is really interesting to me. Musician, teacher, military. I'm none of those things, but I think I'm doing all right. But the really good ones tend to come from those careers. I don't know what it is. Oh, and sales. Sales. So if you're one of those four professions and one of those four buckets of people, definitely think about Parsity. I would love to talk to you. Schedule some time with me. And if you're not, you should still think about it. So I would always look at these people and think, what are they doing? I asked him, I said, dude, what are you doing in your reviews? And I just said, can I just sit with you during a bit of one of your reviews? He was a little bit reluctant. He wasn't the most like, yeah, let's like pair together and work together. That wasn't his personality. He was more of your traditional, yeah, leave me alone type of developer, which is another reality of writing software as a profession. Not everybody's going to want to be your best friend, and not everybody's going to want to be as welcoming as maybe the people you meet online, which tend to be the most vocal. You meet a lot of people that are just kind of silent, want to play the background. They want to do their work, go home, or they want to be really, really technical, not necessarily teach others or mentor others. So he wasn't really into that. No shame or harm on him at all. I just think that wasn't his thing. But he's like, yeah, sure. He's like, how long do you want to do it for? I'm like, well, I just want to like see what you do. And so he just kind of walked me through what he did. He said, well, first thing I do before I even look at the code, I make sure it can run locally, meaning I pull down the code, I spin it up. So let's say it's a website feature, like making a button, for example. And he would make sure that he could spin it up, meaning he could get it running locally. He could see it on his screen, on his machine, and see that the button was in fact a button. This is the best test you can do, because what point is it looking through the code and reading over it and saying, oh, you should correct this little piece here. You should change the name of this, or this function is spelled kind of weird. Did you think about changing it to that? Those are useless types of comments. What's much better is, hey, I noticed that this button is actually a few pixels off from the design where it was intended to be. So he would look at the ticket that told what the original feature should do and looked at that. And then he would compare it to what he sees on his screen. He would use screenshots or a screen share or a video that he could record and then send it over saying, hey, here are the differences I noticed. Before I even look at the code, these things need to be fixed. That can save you a ton of time, and it can make sure that the thing actually works as intended. Because once you can identify what was the intention of the code and what does it actually do, and is there any disparity there, now you can look at the code. And when you're looking at the code, I noticed he was looking at the organization of the code. He wasn't doing these nitpicky things like saying, hey, this function name could be clearer. You named it, add button when it really should be add user event. Those are semi-helpful things to write down. And I think there's a place for those kind of comments. But what he would look at more, I was like, hey, have you considered what if we wanted to add more events? What would happen if we wanted to add a different type of event? You've hard coded it, or you've made it so this function is not extensible, right? You've kind of painted us into a corner here. Have you thought about doing it this way? And he would offer a suggestion with a little snippet of code, even some pseudocode meanings like fake code that wouldn't run, but generally like, a for loop that does XYZ. So it wouldn't be code you could put in your machine and actually run, but it would tell you basically how to do it without really writing the whole thing out. With a chat GPT, this becomes infinitely easier. In fact, if you're a brand new developer or you are looking at your own code and you're learning how to code, what I would do is use ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, act as a senior developer who's a professional with JavaScript or Ruby or Python or whatever you're learning, and saying, I want you to look at this code and provide some feedback as if it was a pull request or a peer review and see what it tells you. Then you can use that information and think, oh, these are things I might not have thought about. It will also help you to see how a professional might handle a peer review. There is an art to this, and most people kind of suck at it because they just want to get back to their job. Here's the other thing he told me, which really stuck with me. Do it in the morning. He always did his peer reviews first thing in the morning because he said, if not, other stuff is always going to get in the way. And these weren't fast, right? To get it spun up locally, working on your machine is a task sometimes in itself. So he would do that. He would look through the code, make sure it worked okay. Think about the extensibility and how it would run. This could take an hour. If it was really, really big, it could take multiple hours. Now, you might think that's insane. How could anybody be expected to do that much? It's really important because you could end up in a situation where I let code get through that could have blown up, right? It could have actually gone out to production and caused a really embarrassing mistake. Thank God it didn't. But if it does, they're going to be looking at you. That could mean your job in some places. That could also just mean you've lost trust, you've lost authority, you've lost a little bit of respect that you have been gaining and building up. So why not take your time and do it really, really, really well? Because there's a lot of value in writing really good PRs. People look at you with respect. People look at you as an authority on the team. People look to you like, man, this person really knows. And also they care. This is going to set you up well when you want to say, hey, I think I should be promoted to senior or mid-level or whatever, because you're saying throughout my year, I've done X number of peer reviews. I consistently get rated as one of the best peer reviewers. I've caught this many bugs from slipping through that could have caused, thousands or whatever dollars in damage or whatever metric you want to put in there. But these are really, really important. Catching bugs before they go out is an underrated skill, and your manager and other developers will appreciate it if they are any good at all. So I applied this step-by-step process to my own peer reviews, and then I saw, one, it slowed me down for sure. I had to take on less points per sprint than I normally did. Points meaning how many items can you get done within a 2-week period is a pretty typical thing that developers will tell their manager. Saying, I can get, 10 points done in this sprint, in this 2-week period. Here's how much I think I can get done. I decreased my points a bit so I could save time for these reviews. I decreased it by like 1 point. So I'd be like, okay, I'm probably going to spend maybe 3 hours a week doing these peer reviews. And I need to be able to take these very seriously. I did. And that year, at the end of the year, it came time for review time. I sat with my manager and he says, hey, you've gotten some really good compliments on your peer reviews. And I thought, oh, this is the moment I was waiting for. I took this to heart. It was one of the best pieces of feedback I ever got, because I went from basically being the worst, in my opinion, to being one of the best. And I definitely was not the best developer on this team at all. These were people that were light years ahead of me in many ways. Many of them have gone on to do really amazing things. I credit this place with really accelerating my career because it exposed me to so many smart and technically advanced developers on this team. It was a great experience. And knowing that I could contribute in some way through my peer reviews to making sure that the code we put out was actually solid and high quality really made my day. So I had 3 developers, he said, that came to him directly and said that was a piece of feedback they had for me, that my peer reviews were really, really thorough and good, and that they saved a lot of bugs from slipping through. So if you are getting into the profession, or maybe you already are, don't fall into the LGTM trap. LGTM, that sounds kind of like it could be a sandwich or something like that. Lettuce, I don't know. Anyway, don't do the looks good to me thing and just half-ass it, because that will eventually catch up with you. I've seen it at multiple companies where I've worked at. In fact, one of the first things I do now when I go into a new company is look at the peer reviews. I think, how could these be improved? This is a great way to make your introduction when you start on a brand new team. And if you don't know what to do in a peer review, you can always ask questions. And if you really are confused, ask the developer if you can pair with them, saying, hey, can we get together, talk for a little bit so I can understand a little bit more about the code you've written, because I'm pretty new here. Great way to introduce yourself, to create community if you're remote, and a good way to establish your authority, even if you're not the best coder on the team. Hope that was helpful. You can read a ton more about PRs. I have an article I've written about it. I've done a lot of stuff with the art of the peer review because I'm really into it, kind of like I'm into unit testing and other things like that. And there's even an app I have, javascriptprosapp.com, which I give for free to all Parsity students. But if you already know how to code, go check it out. It's a really cool app that has a bunch of challenges that are in JavaScript, more advanced things for people that know how to code already, as well as videos on how to do really good peer reviews and understand things outside the typical writing code tutorial. So if that's interesting to you, check it out. And if you want to learn how to code, join us right now at parsity.io. Like I said, this is the last day to qualify for that massive admissions discount. Hope that's helpful, and I'll see you around. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out parsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.